Welcome to Vibration State. I'm Jason Dale. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about my journey with sleep paralysis that I experienced for about 2 decades of my life. I came to realize that sleep paralysis is not a medical condition, but a doorway to something much greater. So if you struggle with sleep paralysis, stay tuned because I want to share with you how I overcame it and what it led to. And as a musician, I've composed and performed all the music you hear on this show to help me tell you my story. I describe sleep paralysis as when your body is asleep in a state of paralysis, but your mind or consciousness is completely awake and aware. I experienced this for the first time around age 11 or 12. And the way that it happened for me was one night I woke up into complete darkness. And I realized pretty quick I couldn't open my eyes, I couldn't move my body. But what was interesting was that I could sense the presence of a dark spiritual entity. I was raised in a Christian church, so at the time I believed that it was a demon trying to attack me. I had no evidence of that. I couldn't see it, I couldn't hear it, couldn't feel anything against my body. I could just sense it, like sense its energy. And it was terrifying. The only thing I could do was pray in my mind to God, asking Him to help me. Shortly thereafter, my body would wake up, I would be fine. This experience happened a lot from age 11 or 12 all the way till about age 30. And it wouldn't happen all the time, it was periodic, and all of these experiences were very similar to what I just described, but with different variations. So the first variation that I experienced was where I would wake up in the darkness, but I would feel the sensation as if I was just free falling and falling and falling. Like I was in a dark, bottomless pit. And then around age 15 or 16, I actually started to hear this entity. And it started out as a really low growl at a low volume. And it would get louder. And I would hear it on my left side, in my left ear. And then once it got to my ear, it was loud. And then it would start to say something to me. And it would just repeat it over and over again. And it would say, "I got you. I got you." And like in the most hostile, hateful, evil voice that I've ever heard. I can't even do it justice. But yeah, it would scare the hell out of me. And then the first time it happened, as I was regaining control of my body and my eyes opened, it was a little later in the morning, so there was plenty of sunlight in the room. And I could still hear this thing in my ear. And I try to look over to see what it is, and I don't see anything. But I could still hear it, and it was coming from like right here. And I knew, even at that age, that whatever this thing is, it's external to me. This is not my imagination. This is not my brain playing tricks on me. And I have since read that the scientific and medical communities have explanations for this. They acknowledge that a lot of people who experience sleep paralysis will sense some kind of evil presence, but they swear up and down that it's just in the experiencer's mind or brain or imagination. But it's not. And as you will see with my journey, it is definitely outside, external to the experiencer. So then, age 16, I meet a guy in high school who becomes my best friend. And it turns out that this guy has a dark entity attached to him, and it's known as the Hat Man. I talk about that in previous episodes. And shortly after I turned 17 years old, this friend comes over to my house and stays with us for a few weeks because he needed a place to live. The first night that he stayed at my house, I ended up seeing this Hat Man entity, and it was also during a state of sleep paralysis. So that's the first time that I actually see something. Then about a year after that, well, year and a half, I start seeing shadow entities. And that goes on through my late teens and into my 20s. And it was also always during a state of sleep paralysis. And one thing that I want to mention is during these states of sleep paralysis, there would be times where I couldn't hear anything. Like my auditory senses were not active, but sometimes they were. And when they were active, I could hear what was going on in the room. Sometimes with my eyes, my eyelids would be open just a little bit, where my physical eyes could kind of see. Couldn't really focus on anything, but could kind of make out the room from my position on the bed a little bit. And that's how I saw a lot of these shadow entities in my late teens and in my 20s. I'm going to do a separate episode on shadow entities, but I just wanted to mention that. So, age 27, I marry my first wife, and that marriage lasts for 3 years. And during those 3 years, I have an increase in the amount of sleep paralysis episodes that I would experience. And at first, I didn't know what to attribute this to, but I start to suspect that it's this oscillating fan in our bedroom. My wife at that time, she had a oscillating fan on a floor stand, sat about this high off the floor, had variable speed controls and would go back and forth. And I would notice sometimes as I was coming out of the state of sleep paralysis, if my auditory senses had not been active, as I would regain control of my body, slowly my auditory senses would start to come back and I could hear what was going on in the room. And when I would hear the fan, it was as if the blades of the fan were going in slow motion. And as I continue to come into my body and gain control of it, the speed of the fan would increase exponentially until it was back to normal. So I feel like that's also a hint about the nature of sleep paralysis, as you'll see shortly. So I felt like the fan was inducing some of these episodes, and which was causing, increased episodes of sleep paralysis. Another interesting thing was that my wife had 2 cats that she brought into the marriage. And these cats would sleep at the foot of our bed, and they would curl up into a ball every night, sleep through the night just on the bed. So sometimes when I would have these episodes of sleep paralysis and my auditory senses were still functioning during the sleep paralysis, I would sense the presence. And as soon as I would sense it, it was as if the cats did also, because they would immediately jump off of the bed, tear out of our bedroom, run down the hall, run down the stairs to the main level. And it would startle my wife awake. And she would try to wake me up, which ended up helping me out of my state of sleep paralysis. And she was concerned that there might have been a intruder in the house because she didn't know what she heard that woke her up. And I would explain to her, no, I just had another episode of sleep paralysis. There was a dark presence in the room that spooked the cats and they ran out. But there's no intruder. Don't worry about it. Go back to sleep. Of course, she couldn't really relate to my experience, but I would convince her that there's nothing to worry about. So I realized that the cats could sense this presence as well, because my body wasn't moving. I couldn't move my body. There was nothing I could have done to spook the cats. This was the same presence that is, I guess, spooking me, is spooking the cats. So that's another piece of evidence that I had, and that happened many times. So like I said before, this marriage only lasted 3 years. And so now at age 30, I'm going through a divorce. My wife had moved out, and it was a contentious divorce. We didn't have any children, so that was good. No custody battle or anything like that. But my wife had brought nothing but debt into the marriage. I paid it off, bought her a car. And now she's trying to take as much as she can from me through the divorce process. But fortunately, the state we resided in recognized that all the property that I owned before the marriage is not marital property. But she was trying to break into my house and take whatever she could. Fortunately, I was able to protect my property. But also, the court had awarded her alimony during the divorce proceedings. So that incentivized her and her attorney to try to delay and prolong the divorce from being resolved just so she could keep receiving alimony from me. So this divorce went on way longer than it should have. And it was a tough time for me. It was also a time of healing and just rebuilding my life, it was a lot of positive, but it was still a challenging time period. So there was 1 week during this divorce process where the sleep paralysis got out of hand. During this time, I worked at a corporate office for a financial institution, and I would work a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5:30 schedule. So it was early in the week. It was like either a Monday night or a Tuesday night. I go to bed, and as I fall asleep, I end up in a state of sleep paralysis. I'm able to break free, and then again end up in a state of sleep paralysis, which wasn't uncommon. A lot of times, if I did experience sleep paralysis like this on the front end, as I'm going to sleep, sometimes I would experience it maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times at the most. And then after that, I'd be able to sleep for the rest of the night with no problem. But this particular night, it was just all night. Every time I started to drift to sleep, this entity seemed to be waiting for me, and I didn't end up getting any sleep that night. So the next night, same thing. And I struggled with it for several hours until I finally had had enough. And in the middle of the night, I decided I'm just going to get up and work on my music. And that's what I would do in the evening. So I decided I would just continue working on what I had been working on and do that until I had to get ready and go to work the next day. So now I'd had 2 nights with no sleep. I'm exhausted. So now it's the 3rd night. I want to sleep really bad. Go to bed. Starts all over again. I'm already in a state of exhaustion, so I'm discouraged. I'm getting concerned. I'm getting worried that I might not be able to get any sleep ever again. So I'm now debating on whether or not to keep trying or just get up like I had done the night before. But I'm thinking I can't. Like I'm losing too much sleep. I need to sleep. So I just keep struggling with it. And as I continue to struggle with it on this particular night, I start getting like pissed off, like at this entity. And it turns into like this anger. And then it's like a defiance. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to sleep whether this thing attacks me or not. And what is the worst that this thing can do? Is it trying to take my soul? Is that what I'm afraid that it's going to do? Is that why I'm so afraid of this thing? So I make the decision that I'm going to go to sleep, and this thing can just do its worst with me. I'm not going to struggle. I'm not going to fight back. I'm not going to resist, which I had always done for the previous 20 years. So as I'm falling asleep, I feel the fear. I feel this presence, but I hold on to the defiance. And as this thing is back, I'm almost trying to communicate with it through my thoughts. And I'm telling this thing, like, I refuse to be afraid of you. Go ahead and do what you need to do. I felt this thing just disappear, like go away. And immediately I started feeling vibrations throughout my body. And as these vibrations increased in frequency, I felt myself start to float up to the ceiling. So now it feels euphoric. I'm happy. I don't feel the fear. I know that this thing is gone. I'm enjoying this floating sensation. I'm heading up to the ceiling and I'm excited. I want to go through the ceiling. So as I get to the ceiling, I think I got too excited because it ended up right back in my body, which my body woke up. Still happy. I know this thing is gone. I go back to sleep through the rest of the night. Everything's fine. And this was the last time that I ever had a problem with sleep paralysis. It was just like the next weekend. It was a Saturday morning. I was sleeping in. I remember I woke up, and as I woke up, it was as if I was flying over the field behind my house. And I'm heading toward my house pretty fast. And as I'm flying closer, I could see my next door neighbor was out in his driveway, and he had this old muscle car. It was like an old Chevelle, and he would work on it on the weekends, and he was out there with it. And so I see him in the car, and I'm flying kind of overhead, and I go through my wall where my bedroom is. I wake up, and it's like probably 9:30 in the morning. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. So sun is up. When I woke up, I immediately went to my bedroom window to look out and see if I could see my neighbor with his Chevelle in the driveway. Sure enough, it was just exactly how I had seen it. And I knew that my consciousness had witnessed that as I was, coming back to my body. So that's when I started searching out information about out-of-body experiences. And the first book that I found and purchased was Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. And that really, that was kind of the beginning of my journey with out-of-body experiences. So based on this experience, what I concluded was that all those episodes of sleep paralysis that I had experienced for approximately 20 years was nothing more than my consciousness attempting to have a naturally occurring out-of-body experience like I had experienced as a child between ages 3 to 6 approximately. It would be a few years after this experience that I would come across the work of Joseph Campbell. And he wrote the book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And Joseph Campbell was known for talking about the monomyth, also known as the hero's journey. And this is a pattern of storytelling that resonates with all of us because it's a universal experience that we all recognize, even if not consciously, we recognize it subconsciously. So I'll use the hero's journey to describe my journey with sleep paralysis. At the top of the visual, you'll see the main character where the journey begins. And in this case, that would be me. And so this journey starts for me around age 11 or 12. And I'm in the ordinary world of being in my bed at night, which is familiar to me. Then during my first episode of sleep paralysis, I'm unknowingly being called to adventure. At the time, I didn't realize that this was part of my consciousness naturally attempting out-of-body travel. So I end up refusing this call for approximately the next 20 years. The line between the ordinary world and the unknown world is referred to as the threshold. And at the threshold are what's known as threshold guardians.
These are adversaries that try to prevent the main character from crossing into the unknown world. In this case, it was the dark spiritual entity or entities that I encountered over the course of those 20 years. These dark spiritual entities, or threshold guardians, were there to test me and make sure I was ready before crossing into the unknown world of out-of-body travel. So like I said, at age 30, I was being tested for 3 nights straight until I finally learned my lesson and let go of my fear. And once I let go of the fear, the threshold guardian disappeared and I was able to cross over by having my first out-of-body experience as an adult. And from that point on, I didn't have any more episodes of sleep paralysis where I was dealing with these dark spiritual entities. And since then, my journey has continued into the unknown world by only having euphoric out-of-body experiences. In order to understand what's happening during sleep paralysis, I think we first need to understand the out-of-body experience. The best way I can illustrate this is in terms of vibration, phase coherence, and resonance. So I'll use this visual to explain it. In the first diagram, example A, you'll see 2 sine waves that are in phase with each other. Think of one sine wave being consciousness and the other sine wave being the physical body. And this shows when consciousness is in resonance with the physical body. When those sine waves start to separate, I'll refer to this as phase separation. This is shown in example B. So this is the initial process of when consciousness is separating from the body. Now, like I've explained with my out-of-body experiences, I feel an increase in frequency of my consciousness after the initial separation. Although during episodes of sleep paralysis, I felt the initial separation but not the increase in frequency or vibration. Maybe that was due to the presence of the dark spiritual entity, or more specifically, the fear that I had of it. And that is what I believe prevented my vibration to raise and fully separate from my body. When my consciousness returns to my body, the process is similar, but in reverse. I feel my consciousness coming back in phase with my body. Earlier, I had mentioned that the oscillating fan may have given me a hint about the nature of sleep paralysis, and that points toward the out-of-body experience. This is just my observation based on some of my experiences. It seemed at times when my consciousness was coming back in phase with my physical body, time in the physical world appeared to be slowed down. That's the way I perceived it while out of body. And time would speed back up as I came back in phase with my physical body. Sometimes when traveling out of body, I would end up in what I would describe as other planes of reality, where the laws of physics and time are not the same as our physical reality. So this is just an observation I wanted to mention. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my experience with sleep paralysis. I hope my perspective offers you some insight, and I will see you in the next one.